Welcome to the Inclusive Heroes Podcast with your host, Miguel Joey Aviles. Buckle up as we highlight and celebrate leaders who make inclusion happen in their world of work. If you're an HR leader, a DEI practitioner, an ERG champion, recruiter, or ally, this podcast shares the stories of how leaders raise awareness, cultivate courage, and achieve organizational transformation. Join us as we go behind the scenes of true inclusion and belonging. This is the Inclusive Heroes Podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to your Inclusive Heroes Podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about what we don't say about bias. And I have Stacey Gordon with me. She is an executive advisor, DEI strategist, and author of Unbiased, Addressing Unconscious Bias at Work. Her LinkedIn online courses have been viewed more than 1 million times. Stacey, how are you?
I am fantastic. I am doing really well and excited to be able to be here connecting with you after having had the opportunity to work with you prior. So just excited to be here.
I am thrilled to have you with us. Stacey is recording from Los Angeles, California. I'm recording from Puerto Rico. So we are thrilled that you are here with us. And, you know, Stacey, the first question that I have for you as the CEO of Rework, you have worked with hundreds of global clients. And in your experience, what is it that we don't say about bias?
I mean, gosh, what don't we say? We don't talk about it, period, right? And I say that even knowing that right now it is a hot topic, but it's a surface level topic, right? It's kind of a buzzword. We don't talk about the things that we actually can do in the workplace to solve some of these problems. It's so much easier to say, oh, woe is me, and to kind of wring our hands and say, it's the pandemic, it's the great resignation, it's all these other things, rather than actually look around and say what the things are that we can do to solve some of these problems. So I do find that there's a lot of excuse making and not nearly enough accountability.
No, that is powerful, Stacey. You know, I am a former chief of diversity and inclusion, and we often talked about unconscious bias from the surface level, or we had some of our members and executives attend that training, but I know it takes much more. You have been studying this topic for many, many years, at the point that you decided to write what is now a best-selling author book. So what propelled you to write the book on bias, Addressing Unconscious Bias at Work?
A lot of it really is just boils down to my personality. And that is that I like efficiency, and I really, really hate repeating myself. So I figured if I wrote it down, then you could read it and I wouldn't have to keep saying the same things over and over again. Of course, that hasn't actually happened because, of course, I still do a lot of speaking, a lot of training, and a lot of coaching. And I do still repeat myself a lot. But that was part of the impetus, was just that I wanted to get the information out there. And I wanted to say the things that, like you said, people are not saying about bias. Like, I wanted to be able to say that, yeah, you might need to hire a chief diversity officer, and you might need a diversity council or ERG groups, and you might need unconscious bias training. But we need to start and figure out really which of those things do you need and why, and what is the outcome going to be for you, and what's going to change if you do these things, rather than just, having me come in and say, oh, let's do unconscious bias training. And then nothing else gets done after that. Like, there's no follow-up, there's no accountability.
Yeah, empowering our people and setting those systems of accountability is so important, particularly on these topics. And the last 2 years, we have seen a big increment in topics of diversity, inclusion, unconscious bias, microaggressions, etc. And there are some organizations that have improved in their diversity and inclusion progress and maturity. But in your experience, are workplaces improving, or are you seeing more unhealthy workplaces?
I think we're seeing improvement, but we're also seeing a rise in awareness of incidents and in the ability to speak up about them. So before, bad things would happen in the workplace, and you kind of were just like, well, I'm just happy to have a job, so I'm going to shut my mouth and sit in my corner and just take it. But now we don't have to. So we're talking about it. And when you talk about something more, it seems like it's happening more. It seems like it's more pervasive. It seems like it's more, difficult. But I don't know that that's really the case. I think it's just that we're actually being able to talk about it more and to do something about it. And I think that's a good thing.
It is a good thing. And, we have been talking more and more about employee activism, and we now have shared this information, like you said, across the board. So now we know it's not normal, we know it's not okay. And as managers, as leaders, many of our audience listeners are leaders, and even the practitioners as well. So how do we help our leaders to get better at this? And we want to be action oriented and tell people a few things that they can do. And I know, Stacey, that you can share dozens and hundreds of steps and strategies, but what is one action that managers can take to identify and address bias in the workplace?
Well, I think before they can do that, I always ask the question, like, do you really want to do it, right? You have to buy into it. So if you don't actually want to do it, if there's no authenticity behind your actions, then there's no point, right? You're kind of wasting everybody's time. I would much rather you say, Stacey, I like the status quo. I'm not changing. Leave me alone. Okay, fine. Thank you very much. Appreciate your honesty. We can part. I won't say as friends, but we can part, right? But there's this idea that there's this facade, right? This fakeness out there that I have to say these things and I have to act like a proponent, even when I don't really believe it. And I think for some of the people that don't really understand it or don't believe, right, in DEI, and I use air quotes because it's like, it's not something to believe in. This is not the tooth fairy. But for people who don't understand it, I think it's because they haven't taken the time to really sit and absorb it. And they don't understand why they even need to, which I get, right? Sometimes if the argument hasn't been made for why you really need to do this, I get it. But I do think that you first have to ask yourself, do I actually give a damn? And if you do, then we can have a conversation about what you do next, because then what you do next, honestly, doesn't really matter. It's about being authentic in what you do next. But if you can't be authentic in it, and that's really what a lot of the problem has been, you're doing things and it's not authentic and people see that, they feel it. And so you're out here saying, but I did this and I tried that and I said this. And it's like, yeah, and we all know it's BS. So that's why you're not being successful at it.
Yeah, and people are getting better as smell BS across the board. So when managers are not doing it from the heart, not doing it authentically, then they can smell it. That is powerful. That is powerful for DEI practitioners, because I remember, Stacey, a conversation I had, and I would say a courageous conversation, where I had a team member, not within my team, outside, from another branch or another team within the organization. And that particular individual came to me, Miguel, managers don't want to change. Managers don't believe in this stuff. How are you, as a DEI leader, going to set accountability? And we're going to talk about accountability later on in this conversation. But people are demanding accountability. So what do we do? I'm Stacey, and here's an open conversation. What do we do when we have managers in leadership positions saying, and maybe they don't say it in front of you, but we know they don't care about it? How do we handle that? I'm
Yeah.
curious.
I mean, so there's two things that have to happen. One is from an employee standpoint, if you don't have the power or a position to where you can do anything about it, the thing you can do is leave. And honestly, that's part of why we're experiencing this people leaving companies in droves right now, right? Because they've said, you know what? I gave you time. I gave you my time during COVID, and you showed me who your true colors are, and I'm out. I'm done. Thank you very much. And so that's one thing that we can do is we can leave, because you can go someplace else where you are going to be valued, where you are going to be listened to, your voice will be heard, where your opinions will matter, where you can be your true authentic self in the workplace. Those places do exist. And if we go flood those places with resumes, right, and with applications, and we leave the places that don't value us, they're going to die out. And that's what's happening. So that's one thing that can be done on the employee side. I think on the other side, what we have to do is the accountability. We have to hold people accountable. And we've been talking about this, not even just from a DEI standpoint, but we talked about it before DEI got big. It was Me Too, right? We were talking about sexual harassment in the workplace, and working conditions for women are terrible, and this is unacceptable, and we can't allow this, right? If we look at all the men who got fired over a certain period of time,
Yeah.
and there were a lot more men who should have been fired, and women actually, who allowed those men to continue in those jobs, right? So that's also part of it. Is we know every single person listening right now can raise their hand and give me the name of somebody in a company today, or maybe in a past life, who they worked with, who knew right off that person should be fired because they're not behaving in the way that they should be, right, in the workplace. But yet they can continue to come to work every day, right? They continue to lead meetings. They continue to get promoted. So if leaders are not going to put the hammer down and have accountability and say, we will not tolerate this, right, then you have to leave. And so those are the two things that have to happen. Leaders have to say, we're not tolerating it. You are fired. You're out. And employees have to say, if you're not going to do that, then we're out.
And that is powerful. It's strong. It sounds strong, but that is the reality that we are experiencing right now. And actually, studies shown that there are some cultures, some organizational cultures, where allow toxic leaders to thrive in those cultures. Basically, if you're not toxic, you don't get promoted in that particular organization, which is very it's disappointing to still see. In your book, Stacey, you talk about placing accountability on organizational policies that allowed biased behavior, and that's what we're talking about here. If we start tackling those systems and placing accountability in those organizational policies that allow biased behavior to thrive, is the key. The question I have for you is, how do we do that? How do we place accountability on those organizational policies?
I mean, it's the same way we have accountability for sales, right? If I'm in sales and my job is to hit a metric and I don't, and I do that repeatedly, guess what? I'm fired, right? I mean, I don't know how else to say it. So if you have, uh, accountability for making sure that you have a diverse team, making sure that people are being heard, making sure that people aren't being bullied or sexually harassed, and you fail to do that, then you were fired. I mean, we have to actually hold fast to these principles, because if we don't, we see what happens when we don't. We have the types of organizations that we've had in the past, and we're moving away from that. So there's actually a statistic, and I forget the exact organization that did it. It was InnoSight. They have been reviewing Fortune 500 companies, their tenure in Fortune 500 over the last like 50 years. And the tenure of companies is getting smaller and smaller. It's decreasing because they're falling off the Fortune 500 list. Why? Because they are decreasing in productivity, they're decreasing in profitability, and they are decreasing in creativity, which you get when you have diversity. So when you are now in this place, you got all these new companies that are coming into the market. 20 years ago, Tesla didn't exist. 20 years ago, Lyft didn't exist. Uber didn't exist, right? Think about all these really great companies that have changed the way that we eat, the way we drive, the way we do business, the way we interact with people. That's what's happening. So we really have to be thinking about the future. And we can sit, on our hands and say, woe is me, I need people back into the workplace because that's what matters. Or we can say, I don't care where you work, as long as you do the work and you're passionate about the work and you give me a great outcome.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like it's time for us to listen to our employees, to our team members, and they're talking, but sometimes there is a big barriers between the voice of our employees and what we do as organizations. So this episode is about what we don't say. And in order to say something, we have to get savvy in having these courageous conversations, Stacey. And I do applaud some organizations during 2020, after 2020, they took certain steps to have more courageous conversations. But the fact is, some people are still terrified to have these uncomfortable conversations, and sometimes they don't want to even get close to that. In your experience, Stacey, how can we be more intentional and courageous when having these tough conversations, or even embracing these tough conversations?
I mean, first we have to start with some education, right? I mean, this is where I have to do a shameless plug for not just me, but for all consultants and DEI practitioners out there. We have been saying, like, for the longest while, you have to get educated. Why on earth, if I need to have a conversation about nuclear physics or something, right? Are you going to send me out and say, Stacey, go have this conversation? Or are you going to make sure that I have been educated, that I have the credentials, that I have been trained, that I know what I'm talking about, that I can explain what this thing is, what the effects are going to be, what the parameters are, right? That I can have that conversation and be fully ready to do it.
Yes.
Right? You got
Yes.
to make sure that I've gotten the education before you just willy-nilly throw me to the wolves to have this conversation. Why are we doing that in the workplace when it comes to these concepts? It's like, oh, you're a Black person? Let's have you talk about this. Oh, you're a woman? Let's have you talk about it. Oh, you've worked in the company for 15 years? Let's have you talk about bullying.
Yes.
What are we doing? Right?
Isn't that incredible? Or build this a book of the business case of why should we be talking about X, Y, and Z. And that's what we continue to face in organizations. And Stacey, at the beginning of the podcast, I said that you had some amazing LinkedIn online courses. I'll be remiss if I don't ask you about that. Please tell our audience, how do they find them, what topics you talked about, and whatever you want to share.
Yes, thank you. So, I mean, along those lines, right? Even for this, even I know the content on LinkedIn, it's a great awareness builder. We want you to just start to get an understanding. And so the courses on unconscious bias. My unconscious bias course actually is the #1 course for LinkedIn Learning for all of 2021. So it was the most viewed, most watched course across the entire platform. So yes, I'm proud of that. But really, I had nothing to do with that,
Congratulations.
right? A lot of it is just that. Thank you. A lot of it is just that it's a big topic, right? Everyone is talking about it. Everyone was searching. So unconscious bias. I also have a course on diversity recruiting. But I also have to say that really there is no such thing as diversity recruiting. Diversity recruiting is just good recruiting. So if you want to recruit well, you really should understand what diversity recruiting is and embody that as a recruiter. If you are a recruiter and you have not really looked at diversity, then you are an incomplete recruiter because you don't have a full arsenal of tools in your right in your tool belt. So the other two are actually related to sort of your personal journey in the workplace, and that's writing a resume and making a career change. And this is why I'm so passionate about, like I said, if you as an employee, this doesn't work for you, go make a career change, get your resume together and get out, right? Don't sit somewhere and let someone take advantage of you, underpay you, undervalue you, and overlook you. Go.
I love it. I love it. And education is key. Self-awareness is key. So let's just play a scenario here. We have a manager, Stacey, that did what you are recommending. Get smart on these issues. Get educated. Be self-aware. Do a few assessments. Understand where in the journey are you. So let's just say that this manager did that. All right. So we are on the stage where we are prepared to take action. So let's talk about the behavior and the action that will drive more results. So let's say that we got the opportunity to focus in one behavior, to work and get better in one behavior that will ensure my people will feel that they belong more, that they are more included, and that I care about diversity, equity, and inclusion. If I get the chance to focus in one behavior, what that behavior will be.
Wow. One behavior. I mean, I will say this, right? And this will be a bit of a cop out, but it's accurate that for DEI is a culmination of behaviors. That's what makes it difficult. Because if we start thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and how do we create it, you need to actually understand several behaviors in order for you to be able to do it well. If you just focus on one, you're going to be, again, incomplete, right? You're going to have one tool in your tool belt, but not all of them. But if you had to pick one, I would probably say transparency.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding how to be transparent, because transparency, at least in my mind, helps with a number of different things, right? When you are transparent, usually people can trust you because you are what you say you are, you do what you say you're going to do, right? And trust is definitely needed. If you're transparent, you're usually going to be able to be communicating with people. You need to communicate. People want to know what you're doing, what you're about. They want to know what you expect of them. And if you can't communicate that to them, that's also problematic. I think also transparency is important because people just want to know that you have some kind of a plan, right? Even if I don't agree with your plan as a leader, if I'm an employee, I don't have to agree with you, but I just need to know you have one, right? I just need to know that you have thought things through and that it's based in something, and I want to know what it's based in. So transparency is a really big one because I see it a lot in organizations where employees do not trust their leaders, and it's for all these reasons and a whole lot more.
That transparency is key, and it opens the doors to many other things. And I want to focus in your powerful answer about Miguel. If we focus in one skill, we will be incomplete. It's not that easy. And Stacey, often, I don't know if you have experienced this, but when we do consulting and we go to speaking, people want a shortcut, an easy shortcut for this. And
All the time.
your answer got that point across. There is no easy shortcut here. There is not one thing that you can do to fix the situation. There is a combination of aspects and competencies and skills. This is a journey. That's what I heard, Stacey.
Yeah.
This is a journey that will require much more. So I'm happy. I'm happy that we got the conversation to that level. And
Well, and I
Stacey,
would say too,
yes.
well, I just want to add too, right, that, we talk a lot about being a leader in the workplace, and like there's a reason you get paid the big bucks, right? I think over time, leadership has become this sort of easy coasting job. And it's like, no, there's a reason you get paid more money. You're supposed to know these competencies. You're supposed to do the extra work. You're supposed to be at a higher level than everybody else. And if you're not, you're in the wrong job. And again, I have to go back to fired. Bye-bye. Let them go. Because you are wasting valuable resources within an organization on individuals who don't deserve it. And I'm sorry, but like that's accurate. And we really have to be thinking about it in that way, especially as stakeholders of an organization. You are stewards of the company's money. And every time you pay somebody money, right, that is setting the expectation that you know what you're doing, right? Time you write that paycheck. And so we need to make sure that the people who we are writing paychecks to are living up to what they're supposed to be doing. And if you are day after day putting out paychecks, knowing that these individuals are not doing their job, I mean, that's theft of services.
And there you have it. I believe that's exactly what we are not saying enough. We are not saying enough. Hey, it's time for you to move on, to get your talents placed in another organization or in another team or in another space that will better fit the situation. So for those leaders that are joining us and you're in a space where you're finding yourself, hey, I got a lot to improve. The first thing is embracing that gap, embracing that space and start working on it. Because let me tell you, we all have space to improve. We all have space to grow. The problem is when we ignore that fact and we are not consciously working on it. I think you brought that point home, Stacey, and I believe that's what we're not saying enough. We're not saying enough that, hey, if you're not improving, it's time to go. But Stacey, I have a question in my heart that I want to ask you, and that is about the burnout that many DEI practitioners are currently facing in the space. And often we don't talk about that. You are a published author. Your courses have been seen millions of times. You work as a consultant with tons of leaders. Can you share with our audience what is it that you are doing to take care of yourself, to not get burned out, to allow yourself to renew and continue the good fight?
Number one, I am working with clients who actually want to do this work. So it goes back to that question I asked in the very beginning. Do you actually want to do this? Because if you don't, please stop wasting my time. There are other things that I could do. I'm like, stop wasting my time and your money, right? There's just no point. So I'm really being much more clear and careful about who I work with. Because if you're not ready, that's also okay, right? Maybe you're not ready today. Maybe you do need to go back and do some self-education and do some of that work that needs to be done and then come back. That's okay. But please don't come and tell me that you want me to come in and do all of these things. And then when I get ready to start doing it, you want to ask me why I'm doing it. Like, so that would be my number one piece of self-care, because I love this work. I am passionate about this work. And as long as I'm working with people who want me to make change, even if it's difficult, that's fine. I will solve problems with the best of them. I love problem solving. But I can't change somebody's mindset for them. that's something they've got to do on their own.
That is powerful. And Stacey, thank you so much for taking us from unconscious bias to the actions and behaviors that we can embrace to continue to advance DEI in the workplace. I ask all my guests to close the podcast with their favorite quote, and please share with the audience the quote and why is your favorite.
Oh, goodness. Let's see. I have a couple. I think one is, and I believe it was Maya Angelou who said that once you know better, you need to do better. And that really is something that I say a lot to individuals when I'm working with them, because I always tell them, ignorance may be bliss, but I have just educated you. So now that you know, like, you can't unknow. So like, you can never, ever again use the excuse of, I didn't know, because you do now. And so that means every time that you go out there and you take an action that is contrary to what we've just discussed, right? You're doing it on purpose. We've had this conversation. You know better. So I would say, think of me as a little angel on your shoulder, moving forward, reminding you of the things that we need to do to do better in the workplace. But I think my own quote, which I also love, is just that, there is no such thing as diversity recruiting, right? Diversity recruiting is just good recruiting. Inclusive leadership is just good leadership.
And ladies and gentlemen, that was exactly what we're talking about. And that this is your episode, what we don't say about bias. Now that you know, go ahead and do better. So I cannot think about a better way to close this conversation. Stacey, thank you for opening your brilliance, your mind, your heart with our audience, and I'm wishing you the absolute best. And we will post under the notes your website, your social media handles, so people can connect with you. Stacey, thank you so much.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation.